The silence in the citadel was a living thing, a pressure against the eardrums that was more profound than any sound. It was the sound of control, of polished chrome and filtered air, of heartbeats monitored and thoughts catalogued. For Elian, designated Omega 734, it was the sound of his cage. He stood in the center of the sterile white expanse of training chamber Gamma, his bare feet cold against the shock-absorbent flooring. The light here was flat, merciless, leaching the color from his pale skin and the muted gray of his uniform. It was a light that permitted no shadows, no secrets, no places for a soul to hide. He breathed in, a slow, measured intake of recycled air that tasted of ozone and antiseptic. It was a dead scent, a void where a world of smells should have been. In the quiet moments before the simulations began, he would try to remember. He would close his eyes and chase the ghost of rain on dry earth, the sharp tang of pine needles crushed underfoot, the warm, yeasty smell of baking bread from a life he could barely recall, a life before the citadel had identified him as an anomaly, an omega whose senses were too sharp, too vibrant, a potential disruption to the placid, orderly function of the collective. So they had brought him here, to this silent, scentless world, and taught him to be a weapon. They had honed his reflexes, sharpened his combat skills, and muted the symphony of the world that screamed in his head. They had given him suppressants that coated his tongue like chemical dust, and inhibitors that sat behind his eyes like a leaden weight. They had tried to make him as sterile as his surroundings, but they could not erase the memory of scent. He hoarded them like a dragon hoards gold, tiny, precious fragments of a forgotten world. The faint, metallic tang of his own blood after a particularly brutal training session. The clean, almost floral hint of the nutrient paste they called food. The ghost of something warm and alive that clung to the senior enforcers. A scent of authority and alpha dominance that was both terrifying and achy in its familiarity. Today, there was a new scent in the air, something that cut through the sterile nothingness like a razor. It was faint, barely there, but to Elian's starved senses, it was a thunderclap. It smelled of ozone, yes, but also of Arctic winds and cold, hard stone, of lightning trapped in a jar. It was the scent of power. It was the scent of Apex, Alpha 001, Kalen. The name was a whisper in the data streams, a legend spoken in the hushed tones of technicians. The perfect soldier. The ultimate expression of alpha genetics, honed and perfected by the Citadel's finest bioengineers. He was a weapon made flesh, a being of such singular focus and control that he was said to feel nothing, no fear, no anger, no pleasure, only purpose. And his purpose was to be the unwavering, unshakable fist of the collective. Elian had never seen him in person, only in flickering simulation, projections, a figure of impossible grace and brutal efficiency, a phantom of grey and black moving with a speed that defied physics. Now, his scent preceded him, a promise and a threat. The director's voice, a calm, synthesized alto, echoed through the chamber, devoid of warmth or inflection. Omega 734, prepare for convergence protocol. Your final assessment. Convergence. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. It was not a test. It was an execution, a final measure of an asset's utility before decommissioning. And they were pitting him against Apex, a flicker of something cold and sharp, something that might have been fear, traced its way down Elian's spine. He suppressed it. Fear was a chemical reaction, an inefficiency. The Citadel had taught him that. He was not an asset. He was not an experiment. He was a boy who remembered the smell of rain, and he would not be erased without a fight. The far wall shimmered, a panel of chrome sliding away with a near soundless hiss. And there he was, Kalen. He was larger than the simulations suggested, a monolith of muscle and controlled potential, packed into a tactical black uniform that seemed to absorb the sterile light around him. His hair was the color of spun silver, cut severely short. His eyes, when they found aliens across the white expanse, were the pale, piercing blue of a glacier. They held no malice, no interest, nothing. They were the eyes of a predator assessing its mark, calculating vectors and predicting outcomes. His scent washed over Elian in a wave, and it was everything the prelude had promised and more. Cold, clean, and overwhelmingly powerful. It spoke of dominance not as an emotion, but as a fundamental law of physics, like gravity. It was the scent of a storm front, of the absolute certainty of the coming tempest. Elian's own scent, muted by suppressants and years of repression, felt like a pathetic, shivering thing in its presence. A flicker of jasmine and sea salt, a ghost of what an Omega should be. The director's voice returned. The objective is submission. The parameters are absolute. Begin. There was no klaxon, no signal. There was only Kalen moving. He didn't run. He flowed. One moment he was across the chamber, the next he was a blur of motion, closing the distance with a terrifying, silent economy. Elian's training took over. His body, honed by 1,000 brutal simulations, reacted before his mind could process the sheer unreality of it. He dropped, twisting, the air sizzling where his head had been. Kalen's hand, rigid as steel, had sliced through the space. Elian came up into a defensive crouch, his senses screaming. It was one thing to fight a projection. It was another to face the reality. The sheer pressure of the Alpha's presence was a physical force pressing in on him, making the air thick and hard to breathe. He was not just fighting a man. He was fighting an idea, an icon of absolute power. And beneath the cold, there was something else in that scent, something Elian's overdeveloped senses snagged on, a trace of something broken, a faint, almost undetectable note of burnt ozone, like a circuit that had been overloaded one too many times. It was a flaw, a crack in the perfect facade, and it was the only hope he had. The fight was a blur of white and black, a brutal ballet set to the sound of rhythmic breathing and the soft scuff of boots on the pristine floor. Kalen was relentless, a force of nature. Every strike was precise, aimed at a nerve cluster or a joint, designed not to kill, but to incapacitate, to force the submission the director demanded. Elian was a reed in a hurricane, bending, weaving, using Kalen's own momentum against him. He was faster than the simulations had predicted, more agile. His anomalous nature, the very thing they sought to control, gave him an edge. He could feel the shift of air currents as Kalen moved, smell the faint spike of ozone in his scent that signaled an imminent strike. It was a dance on a razor's edge. He couldn't win. He knew that. The goal was not victory. The goal was survival. The goal was to prove he was more than a failed experiment ready for the incinerator. He had to endure. He had to show them the flaw in their perfect weapon. He dodged a sweeping kick that would have shattered his ribs, the wind of it stirring his sweat-dampened hair. He used the motion to pivot, driving his elbow toward Kalen's side. It was like striking granite. The Alpha absorbed the blow without a flicker of reaction, his glacial eyes fixed on Elian's. There was no pain in them, No anger, just processing. His hand shot out, grabbing Elian's arm. The contact was electric. A jolt of pure, undiluted alpha energy flooded Elian's system, hot and overwhelming. But something else happened. The moment their skin touched, a feedback loop erupted. For a split second, Elian was not in his own head. He was somewhere else. A memory, sharp and vivid. Not his own. Cold. The sting of nutrient fluid in an incubation pod. The hum of machinery, a lullaby of wires and steel. A voice, the director's, younger but just as cold. Subject Zora 1 shows optimal development. No emotional deviance detected. The vision vanished as Kalen flung him away. Elian hit the floor hard, the impact jarring his teeth, but his mind was reeling from the psychic intrusion. It was a side effect of his anomaly they'd never been able to fully suppress. Empathic resonance. Physical contact sometimes created a bridge, a brief, chaotic glimpse into another's mind. With Kalen, it was like touching a live power conduit. The experience had clearly affected the Alpha as well. For the first time since the fight began, Kalen hesitated. He stood perfectly still, his head tilted by a fraction of a degree. His pale eyes were narrowed, not in anger, but in confusion. The perfect machine had encountered an unexpected variable. He could feel it now, a faint thrumming in the air. Between them, a connection that hadn't been there before. He could smell a change in Kalen's scent. The cold stone and ozone were still there, but now they were marbled with something else. The faint, bewildered scent of static and confusion. He had hurt the machine, not its body, but its programming. Elian pushed himself to his feet, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His arm throbbed where Kalen had grabbed him. He saw his chance, not to attack, but to push the advantage, to disrupt the system. He charged, not with the intention of landing a blow, but of making contact again. Kalen, his programming momentarily scrambled, reacted a fraction of a second too late. Elian slammed into him, his hands finding purchase on the hard planes of the Alpha's chest. The world exploded. It was a torrent this time, a chaotic flood of sensory data pouring into Elian's mind. He felt Kalen's entire existence in a single, brutal instant. Decades of relentless training, the cold discipline, the neural inhibitors that dampened his emotions into flat lines on a data chart, the crushing weight of the designation apex, the profound, soul-deep loneliness of a being engineered to be alone, to be superior, to be untouchable. He felt Kalen's shock as his own senses, Elian's senses, bled back across the connection, the sudden, overwhelming awareness of the flat, sterile light, the taste of the dead air, the ghost of jasmine and sea salt that was Elian's own suppressed scent, a scent Kalen had likely never encountered in his sanitized world. It was a symphony of sensation to a man who had only ever known silence. Kalen staggered back, a guttural sound ripping from his throat, the first sound Elian had ever heard him make. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. His glacial eyes were wide, no longer processing, but feeling. He looked at Elian not as a target, but as the source of this sudden, terrifying, vibrant chaos. The connection between them pulsed, a raw, open nerve, and through it, Elian felt a surge of something primal from the Alpha, an instinct so deep it bypassed all conditioning, all control. It was a possessive, territorial, and utterly desperate urge, the need to control the source of this overwhelming stimulus, the need to claim it, to silence it, to make it his. He moved faster than Elian could have imagined possible. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He was an animal. He slammed Elian against the wall, the impact knocking the air from his lungs. One powerful hand pinned his arms above his head. The other cupped the back of his neck, forcing his head to the side, baring the soft, vulnerable flesh below his ear. Elian's heart hammered against his ribs. This was not in the training parameters. This was not submission. This was something else entirely. Kalen's face was close, his silver hair brushing Elian's temple. Those glacier blue eyes were blown wide, pupils dilated, swimming with a terrifying mixture of confusion and raw, undiluted instinct. His scent was a maelstrom of ozone, stone, and a new, shockingly hot smell of possessive rage. "What are you?" Kalen's voice was a low growl, rough and unused, the sound of stone grinding against stone. Before Elian could answer, before he could even think, Kalen lowered his head. His breath was hot against Elian's skin, and then his teeth sank into the juncture of Elian's neck and shoulder. Pain, white-hot and blinding, exploded behind Elian's eyes. It was a searing, tearing agony that stole his breath and his consciousness. But beneath the pain, something else was happening. A bond, ancient and irrevocable, snapped into place. A circuit was completed, flooding his entire being with Kalen's essence. It was a brand, a claim, a mark. In the silent, sterile world of the Citadel, an Alpha had just marked an Omega. In the middle of a sanctioned assessment, the perfect weapon had not only malfunctioned, he had shattered his own programming. And through the searing pain, as his vision dissolved into blackness, Elian felt a final, triumphant thought. The entire pack would know. The system was broken. The world returned not as a gentle dawn, but as a fractured, agonizing mosaic of sensation. Elian was adrift in a sea of white light, white sheets, the white hum of medical machinery. The scent of antiseptic was so strong it burned his nostrils, a desperate attempt to scrub away the scent of what had happened. But it was useless. The other scent was grafted to his very soul now, a permanent part of his own olfactory signature. Ozone and Arctic wind and cold stone, woven into his own jasmine and sea salt. It was the scent of Kalen. It was the scent of their bond. A low groan escaped his lips. His neck throbbed with a deep, pulsing ache, a constant, fiery reminder of the claim that had been staked on him. He tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness sent the white room spinning. A cool hand pressed gently against his chest. "Remain still. Omega 734. Your vitals are unstable." The voice belonged to a medic, a beta with a face as impassive as the Citadel walls, but his eyes, when they met Elian's, held a flicker of something new. Awe, fear, the kind of look one gives to a religious icon or a natural disaster. The news had clearly spread. The bond between an Alpha and Omega was not a secret whisper. It was a biological broadcast. Every Alpha in the Citadel would have felt the seismic shock of its formation, a deep, instinctual tremor that announced a new pairing. And for Apex to be one half of that pairing, it was unthinkable. It was a system failure of catastrophic proportions. "Where is he?" Elian's voice was a raw croak. The medic's face remained neutral, but he couldn't stop his eyes from darting towards the reinforced door of the medical bay. Alpha 001 is in containment, undergoing recalibration. Recalibration. The word was cold, clinical, but Elian knew what it meant. They were trying to erase what had happened. They were trying to scrub Kalen's mind, to reset his programming, to sever the bond that he had forged in a moment of pure, primal instinct. A sudden A violent wave of nausea and vertigo washed over Ilian, so intense it stole his breath. But it wasn't his own. It was a phantom sensation, an echo from across the facility. It was Kalen. Through the raw new bond, Ilian could feel him. He felt the cold shock of the recalibration chamber, the icy chill of sedatives flooding his veins. He felt the disorienting buzz of neural scramblers trying to untangle the knot of the bond in his mind. And he felt Kalen's confusion, a vast, silent scream in the void of his consciousness. The perfect machine was fighting back, not with violence, but with sheer, stubborn existence. The bond was a new fact, a piece of data that his programming could not compute or delete. It was an error in his core code, and it was causing the entire system to crash. The director appeared at the door, her presence chilling the already cold room. She was a tall, severe woman, her face a mask of placid control. But Ilian, his senses now amplified and twisted by the bond, could smell the truth on her. Beneath her sterile, emotionless scent, there was a faint, sharp tang of burnt sugar, the smell of fury barely contained. "Omega 734, she said, her voice the same synthesized alto as before. "You have become a significant complication." She walked to his bedside, her eyes, the color of faded slate, scanning him not as a person, but as a problem to be solved. "The bond is an anomaly, a biological misfire. It will be corrected." "You can't," Ilian whispered, the words costing him a significant effort. "It's done." The director's lips thinned into a bloodless line. "Everything can be undone, Omega. We created Apex. We can repair him. As for you," she let the sentence hang in the air, a threat more potent than any weapon. They would decommission him, erase him, and with him the evidence of their failure. But as she spoke, Ilian felt another surge through the bond. It wasn't pain this time. It was a memory, Kalen's memory, bleeding through the scramblers and sedatives. A small, silver-haired boy, no older than 5. He is holding a stone, a perfectly smooth grey river stone. He is fascinated by its texture, its coolness. The director takes it from his hand. "Attachments are an inefficiency. Subject 01. You will learn to feel nothing." The boy's face is blank, but inside, a tiny, nascent part of him cries out in protest at the loss of the one simple, beautiful thing he has ever held. The memory was so vivid, so filled with a child's silent, helpless grief, that it brought tears to Ilian's eyes. He was seeing the ghost of the boy inside the perfect weapon, the part of Kalen that the Citadel had tried and failed to completely erase. And he knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in his bones, that the bond wasn't a misfire. It was a connection. His anomalous, overactive senses had found the one crack in Kalen's perfect conditioning, the one buried, yearning part of him, and had latched onto it. The marking hadn't been an act of aggression. It had been an act of desperation. A drowning man reaching for a lifeline. "He remembers," Ilian said, his voice gaining a sliver of strength. He looked directly into the director's cold, slate-grey eyes. "You tried to make him a machine, but you failed. There's still someone in there. And now, he's connected to me. What he feels, I feel. If you try to erase him, you'll be erasing a part of me too." For the first time, a flicker of genuine emotion crossed the director's face. Annoyance. The problem was more complicated than she had anticipated. She had 2 malfunctioning assets now, linked in a way her science couldn't easily explain or sever. She turned to leave, her footsteps silent on the sterile floor. At the door, she paused. The bond will be studied. Your anomaly presents a unique opportunity for data acquisition. Do not mistake this for clemency. The door hissed shut, leaving Elian alone once more in the humming silence. But he was not alone. Not anymore. He closed his eyes and reached out, not with his hands, but with his mind, following the invisible, thrumming thread that now tied his soul to another's. He found Kalen in the cold, dark depths of the recalibration chamber. He could feel the Alpha's struggle, the confusion, the phantom echo of Elian's own jasmine and sea salt scent that now haunted him. Mine, a thought echoed across the bond. It was not a word, but a feeling, a primal certainty. It was Kalen's thought, raw and unfiltered. Mine. Elian sent a feeling back, a fragile pulse of reassurance. I am here. Across the citadel, in the heart of the machine designed to unmake him, the perfect weapon went still. The neural scramblers whined, their frequencies finding no purchase. Because the error was no longer just in his code. It was a shared signal, broadcasting on a frequency the citadel could not jam. The anomaly was now contagious, and it was growing stronger. Days bled into a monotonous cycle of white walls and humming machines. Elian was a specimen now, a living, breathing data point. Medics came and went, drawing blood, attaching sensors, their hands careful, but their eyes filled with a detached curiosity. They monitored the bond as if it were a strange new star, charting its gravitational pull, its energy fluctuations. They spoke in low, clinical tones about synaptic bleed-through and empathic resonance, trying to cage the raw, living magic of it in the sterile language of science. But they couldn't chart the way Elian felt Kalen's dreams. They were fractured, chaotic things, spliced together reels of brutal combat simulations, the cold face of the director, and the recurring, haunting image of a smooth grey river stone lost forever. Sometimes Elian's own memories would bleed across, and he would feel Kalen's sudden, sharp confusion as he experienced the ghost of sunlight on his skin or the taste of a wild berry, sensations so alien to his engineered existence that they registered as system shocks. They were two prisoners in solitary confinement, whispering to each other through a crack in the wall. The recalibration attempts on Kalen had stopped. They had failed. Every attempt to sever the bond or reset his programming had resulted in a violent backlash, a psychic scream that caused every alpha in a 5-kilometer radius to double over in sympathetic agony. The bond was too strong, too deeply woven into the very fabric of their beings. Kalen was a broken asset, but one too valuable to decommission. And Elian was the key to that brokenness, the lock and the chain. So they were left in their separate prisons, a living experiment the director observed with cold, calculating patience. One afternoon, the door to Elian's room hissed open. It was not a medic this time. It was Kalen. He was flanked by two heavily armed enforcers, their own alpha scent thick with tension and unease. Kalen himself looked diminished. The overwhelming storm of his presence was muted, banked. He wore a standard grey Citadel uniform, same as Elian's, not the black tactical gear of Apex. On his neck, Elian could see the faint, angry red marks of a neural inhibitor collar, a device designed to dampen his alpha instincts and abilities. They had put their god in chains. His glacial blue eyes found Elian's across the room. There was no recognition in them, no memory of the brutal dance in the training chamber. His face was a blank slate, the perfect, emotionless mask of Apex. But Elian could feel him. Through the bond, Beneath the sedatives and the inhibitors and the layers of conditioning, he felt a low, continuous hum of confusion, a single looping question. What is this? What is this feeling? The director has authorized limited, controlled interaction, one of the enforcers said, his voice tight. To study the bond's behavioral impact, any deviation from protocol will result in immediate termination of the session. Kalen was guided to a chair bolted to the floor on the opposite side of the room. He sat with perfect posture, his hands resting on his knees, a statue carved from ice. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Elian's heart was pounding. To see him like this, stripped of his power, a prisoner just like him, was more jarring than facing him in combat. "Do you know who I am?" Elian asked, his voice barely a whisper. Kalen's eyes remained fixed on him, unblinking. "You are Omega 734, the anomaly, the source of the data corruption." His voice was flat, rote, as if reading from a script. He was reciting his programming, but the bond told a different story. It pulsed with a frantic, desperate energy. Jasmine, sea salt, warm, safe, mine. "They did this to you," Elian said, gesturing vaguely at the inhibitor collar. "They're trying to bury you." "I am Apex," Kalen stated, the words sounding hollow even to him. "My function is to serve the collective. My previous behavior was a malfunction. It is being corrected." Elian felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, not at Kalen, but at the director, at the system that had taken this powerful being and turned him into a puppet, a ghost in his own body. He stood up, ignoring the warning growl from one of the enforcers. He walked slowly toward Kalen, his bare feet making no sound on the floor. He stopped just out of arm's reach, his eyes locked with the alphas. "No," Elian said, his voice low but fierce. "Your previous behavior was the first real thing you've ever done." He reached out, not to touch, but to project. He focused all his will, all his anomalous power, into the bond between them. He sent a memory, his memory, the feeling of cool mud squishing between his toes as a child, by a riverbank, the scent of damp earth and wild mint, the sound of his mother's laughter, a warm, bright sound, like wind chimes. The memory, so rich and vibrant, hit Kalen like a physical blow. The alpha flinched, a tremor running through his powerful frame. His blank eyes widened, the glacier cracking. He saw it, he smelled it, he felt it. For a fraction of a second, the boy who had lost his riverstone was alive in the eyes of the man. "What was that?" Kalen breathed, the words torn from him, raw and real. The mask was gone. The enforcers tensed, their hands going to their weapons. "Protocol deviation detected," one of them barked. "Session terminated." "Look at me," Elian pleaded, his voice urgent. "Remember, not what they told you, what you are." Kalen was staring at him, his face a canvas of dawning horror and wonder. He was looking at Elian, truly seeing him for the first time, not as a target or a data corruption, but as the source of this impossible, beautiful, terrifying world of feeling that was breaking through his conditioning. He raised a hand, his fingers trembling slightly, as if to reach for Elian. The enforcers surged forward, grabbing Kalen's arms, their stun batons crackling to life. Kalen didn't resist. He allowed them to haul him to his feet, his eyes never leaving Elian's. As they dragged him out of the room, he said one word. It was quiet, filled with a universe of confusion and discovery. "Elian." He had said his name, not his designation, his name. The door hissed shut, leaving Elian alone, his body trembling with the effort of what he had done. He had planted a seed. In the barren, frozen ground of Kalen's mind, He had planted the memory of a world beyond the citadel's white walls. And he knew, with the unshakable certainty of the bond that pulsed warmly in his chest, that it would grow. The broken weapon was beginning to mend, not back into a weapon, but into a man. And that made him more dangerous to the citadel than Apex had ever been. The interactions became a regular occurrence, a twisted form of therapy designed by the Citadel's psycho-technicians. They believed that by controlling the exposure, they could map the bond's parameters and eventually develop a countermeasure. They were fools. With every session, Elian pushed more of himself across the connection, not just memories, but emotions, the sting of loneliness, the quiet defiance of his spirit, the fierce, desperate yearning for freedom. He was teaching Kalen a language he had never been allowed to learn, the language of the heart. In return, Kalen's own broken past trickled back to him. Elian learned that Kalen had been conceived in a lab, gestated in an artificial womb, and raised in a sterile creche where affection was a foreign concept. He had never known a gentle touch. His first and only real point of human contact had been the brutal, claiming bite he'd given Elian. The irony was so profound it was almost poetic. The system designed to create a perfect, unfeeling soldier had inadvertently engineered the conditions for the most profound connection of all. During their sessions, Kalen spoke less and less, his programmed responses faltering. Instead, he would watch Elian with an unnerving intensity, his glacial eyes slowly warming, melting into the color of a summer sky. He was learning. He was remembering himself through Elian's memories. The director often observed them from behind a one-way mirror, her presence a cold weight in the room. Elian could feel her frustration, the scent of burnt sugar growing stronger with each failed attempt to control the outcome. She was losing her grip on her greatest creation. The turning point came during their 17th session. Kalen was sitting in his usual spot, the inhibitor collar a dull grey band against his pale skin. He had been silent for nearly an hour, his gaze fixed on Elian's face. Elian had been sharing the feeling of hope, a concept so abstract it was almost painful to transmit. He projected the image of an open sky, a vast, endless blue he had only ever seen in faded data files. Suddenly, Kalen spoke. "The sky," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "Is it real?" "Yes," Elian whispered, his heart aching. "It's real." Kalen closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, the last vestiges of Apex were gone. In their place was a raw, aching vulnerability. "I want to see it." The words were simple, but they were a declaration of war against the Citadel. It was the first time he had expressed a personal desire, a want, an inefficiency. The enforcers in the room shifted, their unease palpable. This was a catastrophic deviation. But before they could react, Kalen moved. He rose to his feet, not with the explosive speed of Apex, but with a slow, deliberate grace. He took a step toward Elian, then another. The enforcers raised their weapons. "Alpha 01, return to your designated position." Kalen ignored them. His eyes were locked on Elian, a universe of unspoken things passing between them through the bond. He was no longer a prisoner of his programming. He was making a choice. He reached Elian, who stood frozen, his breath caught in his chest. Kalen slowly, hesitantly, raised his hand. Not to strike, not to restrain, but to touch. His fingers, calloused and strong, gently brushed against Elian's cheek. The contact was a supernova. The bond flared between them, no longer a trickle of data, but a roaring, incandescent river. It was a flood of shared existence, of two broken halves becoming whole. Elian felt Kalen's awe, his terror, his dawning, earth-shattering love. Kalen felt Elian's fierce, desperate hope, his resilience, his forgiveness. In that single, gentle touch, everything changed. Behind them, the enforcers shouted, but their voices were distant, meaningless. The only reality was the space between them, humming with an energy the citadel could not measure or contain. Kalen leaned in, his forehead coming to rest against Elian's. His scent, no longer just cold stone and ozone, was now warmed by something new, something alive. Elian, he murmured, the name a prayer against his skin. They lied. Everything is feeling. And then the alarms blared. The doors slammed shut. Red lights bathed the room in a bloody, pulsing glow. The director's voice, no longer calm but sharp with cold fury, echoed from the speakers. Protocol Omega. The assets are compromised. Sanitize the chamber. Sanitization, a clinical word for extermination. A colorless, odorless gas began to hiss from vents in the ceiling. Elian's blood ran cold. This was it, the end of the experiment. But Kalen didn't panic. He pulled back, his hands framing Elian's face. His eyes were clear, focused, and for the first time filled with a terrifying purpose. The eyes of Apex were back, but they were not empty. They were fueled by something far more powerful than programming, the will to protect his mate. Breathe slow, Kalen commanded, his voice a low, authoritative rumble that vibrated through Elian's bones. He ripped a panel from the wall with a single, powerful wrench of his arm, exposing a tangle of wires and conduits. His mind, designed for tactical analysis, was now working for their survival, not for the citadel. The gas is a neurotoxin. We have less than 2 minutes. He began tearing at the wires, his movements precise and efficient. Elian, his own mind racing, focused on his senses. He could smell the chemical composition of the gas, could feel the subtle shift in air pressure as the ventilation systems worked to flood the room. He could also feel the enforcers on the other side of the door, their heart rates, their positions. 2 guards outside the door, Elian said, his voice steady despite the growing tightness in his chest. Armed with pulse rifles, Kalen grunted in acknowledgement. He found the wire he was looking for and tore it loose, then slammed it against another conduit. A shower of sparks erupted, and the red emergency lights flickered and died, plunging the room into near darkness. The hissing of the gas stopped. The door's electronic lock sparked and went dead. The lock is fried, Kalen said, turning to him in the dim light. But they will cut through it. He looked at the inhibitor collar on his neck. This is dampening my strength. I need it off. The collar was fastened with a biometric lock keyed to the director's command staff. Impossible to remove. But Elian saw the faint shimmer of an energy cell within the collar's mechanism. The power cell, he said. If I can overload it. He placed his hands on the collar, closing his eyes. He focused, channeling his own bioelectric energy, a minor, anomalous talent he'd always kept hidden. He pushed, feeling for the delicate circuits within the collar. Kalen stood perfectly still, trusting him completely. The bond between them was